sometimes. And we are live. Good morning, everyone. My co-host Carolina is running a little bit late, and I'm hoping that she'll join us in a few minutes. But thank you for tuning in today. Today is a very, very special broadcast, and I know that it's something that a lot of you out there have really been asking me about, and I'm really just excited to kind of talk to all of you. This is something, the thing that we're talking about today is called pharmacogenomics, and I'll let Kristine get into that a little bit later, but I'm going to tell you a really quick story on how pharmacogenomics came into my life. And so just a basic rundown, and then I'll let Kristine go into the technical, but pharmacogenomics is basically the way that your body breaks down certain compounds, right, Kristine?
Correct.
Like you take a pill, and the way you metabolize that is very different in each person. And we like to use the example of like allergy meds, right? One Benadryl works for one person, but it doesn't work for another. They're better off with Allegra. And those are things that are in you that are causing that. In my own story with pharmacogenomics, many of you know I've dealt with a lifetime of illness, many medications, and a lot of damage from medications. And a few years ago in 2019, or 2017, I think, I was introduced to the Stanford Human-Wide program. And luckily, I'm a member at Stanford. And there was this initiative to really show how patients could kind of monitor and be a partner in their own care. And one of the tests that was extremely fascinating was this pharmacogenomics test, which could actually tell me how I broke down some of these medications. And keep in mind, I have the joint replacements and the brain damage and the loss of vision, and we could never figure out what was causing those things. It wasn't my conditions. We didn't really know. And it wasn't actually even the medications, right? It was just the doses of the medications that didn't work out quite so well with myself. And so it really has changed my treatment and my care options. It's formed a better relationship with myself and my physicians because I'm able to really communicate my needs as well. And one of the interesting things, and I think we can bring this up later too, is opioids, right? I'm a person that I have lived in chronic pain for all of my life. I don't remember a day not being in pain. And I was under several narcotics at any different time and had a prescription for 200 Norco at one point. But the medication wasn't doing anything for my pain. And now, due to pharmacogenomics, Dilaudid, which I know a lot of you out there think is this highly potent, dangerous drug, it's actually the best drug for me. And I can have a procedure and come out of that procedure and actually function right away. It doesn't affect my brain, but it does take away the pain. And so I just want to make sure that we all know that there are options out there in this precision medicine and personalized medicine field that we can all access. And there's certain ways, and we'll talk to you about how you can and what's coming, and hopefully we'll get people on the ball and where we're going with this, because I think this is something that could truly impact not just patients, but everyone in general. And so Kristine is actually the founder of the company that originally did my pharmacogenomics. So don't mind me if I am like doing this fangirl thing, because I admire her work and I am looking forward to hearing about what's coming. So Kristine, I'll let you take over for a minute and introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm also clearly a big believer in pharmacogenomics. So thank you for sharing that story. It's part of the reason that I keep going. I was actually working at the lab in 2000 that you had your testing done at. The lab was actually originally founded not by me, but a couple of brilliant scientists back in 1987. It was one of the first crime labs in the country, started with the National Institute of Justice grant. And when I joined in 2000, they were looking for something that leveraged their core competency in providing high quality genetic testing. And way back in 2000, there was an article about a little boy named Michael who had died of an overdose. He had an easily testable pharmacogenetic variation that, in combination with his other medications, led to deadly levels of a drug in his system. And the article talked about the dawning of the age of precision medicine when we would use genetic information to be sure we were giving patients the safest and most effective drugs and doses we could. So we started offering that testing. We were actually one of the first CLIA accredited labs to do that in the country. And I will say, when we started offering it, we went to PubMed, like good geeks. Go to PubMed, you type in these cytochromes that metabolize a lot of medications. And there were literally already over 20 years ago, thousands upon thousands of publications on just how important this is. So not all pharmacogenetics, but most of the time in pharmacogenetics, when we do testing, we're looking at our genetic ability to create these enzymes in our liver called cytochromes or CYPs. I like to think of them like highways for drugs. And highways are very specific to certain drugs. Some drugs only want to drive on one highway, and some drugs drive on multiple highways. And most of the time we take drugs in an active form. And so they go to these highways to get converted to something our body can flush out and get rid of. The opioids, a lot of them, like you mentioned, codeine or tramadol, very commonly prescribed. We take them in an inactive form. They have to go through a liver highway called CYP2D6 to be converted to what actually gives pain relief. So genetically, we put people in categories. We're pretending everyone's a normal metabolizer, 2 lanes of these highways. Some people genetically only have 1 lane, intermediate metabolizers. Some have no lanes, poor metabolizers, and some actually have duplications or upregulating genes that say, open up a 3rd lane or a 4th lane. And so if you give all of these patients the same dose, they're clearly going to have different responses to a growing list of medications: cancer medications, cardiology medications, pain medications, GI medications, transplant medications. There are a ton of medications that have high evidence drug-gene interactions. And so it's really, really important, especially for patients with chronic pain, for patients that have to take multiple medications to manage their conditions. This information can truly be invaluable in avoiding adverse effects and treatment failures.
And I want to touch on and ask a question really quick. Is, you said you could be a fast or a slow in different ways. Now, metabolizing different compounds. So you can be a fast metabolizer of something, or a rapid metabolizer, and a slow metabolizer on something else, correct?
Correct. Absolutely correct. So at Invitae, for example, we have a comprehensive 38 gene panel. So you can have a different both variants found and a phenotype. So most commonly, we put people in these categories: normal metabolizer, intermediate metabolizer, poor metabolizer, or rapid or ultra rapid metabolizer. And that's how they would metabolize the medications that want to drive on that highway. But you're right. So you could be a CYP2C19 poor metabolizer. That would mean Plavix doesn't work for you. This is a drug that's commonly given to prevent heart attacks or strokes. Interestingly, the state of Hawaii won an $834 million lawsuit against the makers of Plavix for not making it more clear that patients with this genetic type would fail Plavix treatment. And guess who's way more likely to have 2C19 poor metabolizer status? Patients of Asian or Pacific Islander ancestry, which clearly impacts our friends in Hawaii quite often. So definitely different for those different drug metabolizing enzymes we look at.
Can't find my mute. Oh, I had it off. So now that you've kind of given us this space, apparently we're having some issues on LinkedIn. And so if anyone is watching on LinkedIn and you want to see the picture, Facebook has a live video of it. Apparently LinkedIn is only audio at the moment. So if you are on LinkedIn and care to watch us, although really no benefit in that, feel free to hop on over to Facebook. So Kristine, I want to ask you, what can pharmacogenomic results reveal for like an individual person?
Sure. So when you're tested, you will get, at least in Invitae, a drug, like a thing that's not actually that helpful. It's got your lab results on it. You're a CYP2D6 poor metabolizer, CYP2C19 normal metabolizer. But those results also, if your ordering healthcare provider submits any medications you're taking and the medications under consideration, they will get a personalized prescribing report that says, hey, based on all of these medications and the genetics, this means you should consider stopping this medication, increasing or decreasing the doses of these medications, monitoring these, et cetera. So here's what you can do at this point in time to optimize the medications for this patient. We also provide a high evidence drug gene table for both the patient and the provider. And this enables the patient and provider to just have a snapshot of drugs that may be problematic purely from a genetic standpoint. So they'll be color coded. Red meaning risks typically outweigh the benefits for this medication. You should probably avoid it. It is important to know, though, even if a drug is green, like no problem. Genetically, it could be a problem, of course, still with your other medications, herbals, things like St. John's wort, foods like grapefruit juice. These also interact with medications. So we also provide access to UScript. This is the clinical decision support tool. It can also integrate into EHRs. But it provides, I would say, very similar to that real-time traffic app on your phone. It's a real-time app that shows your provider any drug-gene interactions. I think of these like metabolic traffic jams. So we're essentially like, whatever the cause, this 2D6 highway is shut down. Here are drugs that do the same thing that your patient can be prescribed instead. So we provide alternatives by class or indication. And if a patient does the testing, we do have providers that can order that, or they can have their own provider order it. And they can share access to that tool with any of their healthcare providers, pharmacists, physicians, nurse practitioners, et cetera.
And I think this is really important too for our general population who we're going through COVID. And I know a lot of people have started on different antidepressants as we've been going through this pandemic. And antidepressants are one of those ones that really have a strong impact on the brain. Can you, I know it's not on our list of things to talk about, but can you, in that respect, because knowing that we do have a lot of people on, drugs for depression, is there, what's the impact on those types of drugs?
I'm so glad you asked. This is actually one of the categories where virtually every medication used to treat depression, anxiety, et cetera, is metabolized by these cytochromes or liver highways I talked about that are highly variable from person to person. Really scary publication came out in Northern Europe recently. They looked at patients taking citalopram or escitalopram and their CYP2C19 status. This is the liver enzyme that metabolizes citalopram and escitalopram, Lexapro. And what they found is that the patients that were poor metabolizers or ultra rapid, so no lanes or extra lanes for these medications, were 9.1% more likely to be victims of suicide.
Wow. That's crazy. And it is funny, right? Because when you do take one of those drugs for depression, there is always that warning, right? That says may cause suicidal thoughts. And to know that that could be potentially mitigated is extremely important. So I think that application in both that pain meds and, depression are for the general public also something really good to know. So we do have a question from Estella, and I know we kind of touched on it, but I'm going to show it up here on the screen really quick before we move on so we don't have to go back. But you touched on it. How is the data shared with the provider or provider EHR from the app?
Yeah, great question, Estella. So the data is available through the Invitae portal. So there's both patient access and provider access in the portal. We do give access to UScript to providers only. It's a provider-facing clinical decision support tool. The FDA considers anything patient-facing a medical device. we're avoiding that at this juncture, but the patient can log in and share it with any of their healthcare providers. The doctor just logs in, and the same row where the results for that patient are, they can launch review medications, and it launches the app with all of their pharmacogenetic test results already added, the medications at the time of testing already added, and then the provider is able to modify it from there. So if they stop a drug, they can stop it in the app. And for EHR integration, that does require the health system to actually have an agreement with Invitae to integrate it into their EHR. We actually had an article in Jaffa today about an implementation that we did at the Christ Hospital Health Network in Ohio. So they've deployed that across their entire health system and have 7 pharmacists that rotate through primary care to help the doctors optimize drug and dose selection for patients using this technology.
Wow, I love that. And I want to say too, these results, when they come back to a patient, they're not always, interpretable, right, by the regular person. So are there people, or is that supposed to be your medical team that's going to be, giving you that information? Who's the team behind pharmacogenomics if you have this test done?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think with the clinical decision support tool, any healthcare provider can easily find the latest evidence-based guidance on whether or not a dose adjustment should be considered or a different medication based on the latest evidence according to CPIC. CPIC is the Clinical Pharmacogenetics Implementation Consortium. This is essentially the guidelines body for when drug-gene interactions are both evidence-based and actionable. So that'll automatically be there, fairly easy. But the super users, the people that really know their stuff in pharmacogenomics, pharmacists, they go to school just as long as doctors to understand how medications work. I will say if anybody out there is taking 5 or more medications, do yourself a favor and go make an appointment with a pharmacist. There are also PGX certified pharmacists out there that are there to help really optimize drug and dose selection. This is all they do. I've often said if my mom had a heart attack, I'd want her to go see a cardiologist. If she has to take over 5 medications, I want a pharmacist on her team.
I love that you mentioned that, right? Because I do think I was just talking to a group of pharmacists the other day, and I think pharmacists and anesthesiologists, some of these physicians and these people that really do carry a big part or a brunt weight of all of this really don't get talked about. And I know that with CVS, a lot of people have an idea of a pharmacist of just some high school kid or college kid who's working behind the counter, but that is not the case. And so really a pharmacist should be an essential and integral part of your care team. So just
Definitely.
thank you for touching on that. So our next question here is, how is pharmacogenomics information being used today?
It's a good question. And unfortunately, historically, a lot of times this has been segregated to academic medical centers. So people like yourself that are lucky enough to get your care at Stanford or Penn so what is happening right now is the PGX community at large is really trying to help create the tools to push this into community care. We actually have right now in the state of California, for you Californians on the line, there's a legislation that is on Governor Newsom's desk for signature that would mandate that Medi-Cal cover pharmacogenomic testing. It's SB 1191. Feel free to email and say, please sign this. But the SB 1191 essentially aligns Medi-Cal coverage for pharmacogenetic testing access with Medicare coverage. So Medicare covers this testing if you are taking a medication that's causing issues or a medication is under consideration where your doctor would consider a drug or dose change. And it's high evidence according to CPIC, that guidelines body, or the FDA. And so just making that parity, that equitable access, a lot of times reimbursement is a barrier for some people. So that there's pushes like that in a lot of states. Cash pay rate right now is $250 and people can use an HSA. They're lucky enough to, have that. So it is accessible to more and more people as the cost has come down, but sadly, a lot of times segregated to academic medical centers still.
Yeah, that's always one of the disappointing things. I think, especially as we have these new technologies and well, not so much new anymore, right? But new to everybody else, these new technologies that really we're struggling to get out there. But what other uses of pharmacogenomics are being studied?
Yeah. So one that's very near and dear to my heart right now is DPYD testing for 5FU or capecitabine. It's a very common cancer medication. It's given very commonly for colorectal cancer, sometimes for breast cancer. And this is a medication that if you do not make the DPYD enzyme at all, you are about 25 times more likely to suffer treatment-related death. you need a different medication. For intermediate metabolizers, you don't need to avoid the drug. You just start at half the dose to avoid severe toxicities or even death because of this genetic variation. It's very, very easy to integrate into cancer care. And I think it's fairly new for pharmacogenomics to start being adopted in cancer care. But I would say if you are diagnosed with cancer, if any of your loved ones are, go get a pharmacogenomic panel. It helps with pain management, antiemetics, a lot of cancer medications. But that one's a really big one.
Yeah. No, definitely. And we have a question here. Oops, sorry, wrong question. That was my comment. But we have a question here from Lindsay where she says, what percentage of patients who will have a clinically significant variation in their PGX profile? I've heard 1 in 5.
Oh, well, actually, it's a great question. So pharmacogenetic variability is incredibly common. Greater than 99% of patients will have a pharmacogenetic variation that on average causes them to have an atypical response to over 10 commonly prescribed medications. So this isn't like other genetic testing you may hear about where rare disease in aggregate is still 8% of the population. So I would say not really rare when you combine it all, but still greater than 99%. So it's very, very common to have a variation that will impact your response. When patients are tested, the 1 in 5 may be at the time of testing. Probably an immediately actionable result that says change a drug or dose. I don't know where the 1 in 5, but very, very common to have the variations. And the thing to keep in mind is I think of this like a seatbelt. You invest in it once, you continue using it for medication safety every time you get in the medication car the rest of your life.
I love that. And we've got another question that came up, and Emily says, thoughts on autoimmune disease medications, steroids versus biologics, etc. How does an overactive immune system complicate PGX?
Yeah. So a lot of things complicate PGX. This is a factor in drug response. So I mentioned the drug-drug interactions, the drug-herbal interactions, the drug-food interactions, things like smoking can alter how we respond to drugs. Disease, there are disease-drug interactions. And so all of that does come into play. I think the thing to think about it is this is another piece of information that should be taken into account when considering how to optimize drug and dose selection. It is not an all end be all. The answer is everything, but it certainly is something that can help refine decision making and help shorten the trial and error period to get you on the medications and doses that'll work best for you.
It's definitely a big piece of the puzzle. And for someone like me who metabolizes so many things differently, it has really been a game changer. And I see your question, Sidikar, but I'm going to come to you in just a minute because that is one of the questions on our list. So I want to ask Kristine, for some of our other listeners that are on the LinkedIn side, can pharmacogenomics be used to help drug discovery?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think that in the drug discovery side, there are probably drugs that were not brought to market that could be because they didn't make it through safety trials because they were given to all comers. And they would actually work really, really well for a normal metabolizer or somebody that had a certain receptor or transporter for drugs that makes them respond better. So I think right now we're moving along this kind of journey of one size fits all to more personalized medication management. I don't think we're very far from a future in which we get comprehensive genomic sequencing, including a lot of information across the entire genome about how we respond to different medications. And as we get more data, we will understand the implications of those. I know we were chatting before the podcast. One of the things I'm really excited about with the EHR integrations we have for UScript in some Epic deployments around the country is that we push in not only these high evidence genes where we can tell the doctor to consider a drug or dose change based on the evidence, but also some developing evidence genes. And we don't tell them to act on that yet because we can't. There's no evidence there. But we can store them in the EHR. And if we get enough patients with that gene that are not responding to a medication or need a higher dose or a lower dose, it starts informing how smaller and smaller sectors of the population are going to respond in unique ways. So.
And I love that, right? Because one of the things that I like to talk about is that collective intelligence, and really just the idea that, alone we can't do much. But if we combine that data from so many of us, we are going to come across with, so many answers. And so my next question that I want to ask is the one that everybody is wondering, and it's really, is it covered by insurance, and how can someone obtain a PGX test?
A great question. So the panel is covered by Medicare with caveats. So if you go to Google and type in CPIC, CPIC, drug, genes, it will pull up this great resource. And anything that has CPIC level A or B, or FDA required or recommended or actionable, I think, something like that, is covered by Medicare if that is a medication that is currently prescribed that's causing issues. So you may change it based on the information, or you're about to prescribe the medication and would change how you dosed it or whether you prescribed it at all, like DPYD and 5-FU. If 2 genes are implicated, they will cover an entire panel. If only 1 gene is implicated, they will only cover the drug gene pair. United Healthcare will cover up to a 15 gene panel if the patient has failed their first anxiety or depression treatment, and that's documented with the order. Beyond that, a lot of the commercial payers, unfortunately, have these like draconian, outdated, not aligned with the evidence policies that cover a drug gene pair here or there. And there's really no rhyme or reason to which ones they select. The pharmacogenomics community is working on outreach. That is why the Medicare policy is now aligned with the evidence because of that outreach. And so we're hoping when we engage with the commercial payers, they'll understand that they should be aligning this with CPIC guidelines. They are the guidelines body, and the FDA. Makes sense. But
for that payer side, I just want to touch on the fact that I have damage from these medications that we will continually pay out for the rest of my life. Right. And so to be able to mitigate some of the damage that may potentially come from some of these is actually also a cost saving, factor here that I don't.
I'm glad you brought that up. We've actually published studies that show dramatic reductions in emergency rooms, hospitalizations, readmissions, even death, as well as dramatic reductions in healthcare costs. When you use this information in high-risk polypharmacy patients. We're now expanding those studies to younger patients as well, 18 and older, not just 50 and older patients, but certainly going to save money in the long run.
I love to see the advancements that are coming a little too slowly for my taste, but I think I'm glad that everything is coming. We have another question from my friend Julie here. Julie is asking, so Julie is a cancer survivor. She says, will this test still benefit someone who has been out of treatment for more than 5 years? So.
Yeah, I think it can benefit anyone, even if you do it preemptively. So it's not going to be covered by insurance if you're like, you know what, I just want this seatbelt for me and my family, but it's $250. I think that is well spent to have this kind of information. I'm healthy. I don't take medication, but I was skiing once and I tore my ACL in half. Wouldn't recommend, hurt a lot. But I had to have surgery. I had to be put on pain medication. And because I have this information, I know that I need different pain medications than other people do because I metabolize them differently. And so if I hadn't had that in advance, I probably would have been out of luck. So it is certainly helpful. I don't know about the 5-year mark. The other thing to keep in mind, tamoxifen, commonly given to prevent breast cancer recurrence. This is a prodrug for 2D6. It does not work for poor metabolizers. There's reduced efficacy in intermediate metabolizers. It's incredibly important information to know because you want a different therapy if the drug's not going to work for you.
Oh, definitely, right. And then we have another, Emily is asking, if you got a transplant, that's not all your DNA in your body now. So how does that change things?
Yeah. So the big thing's the liver transplant. You're all right with other transplants, but if you did have a liver transplant, you're right. You would want the information from the donor liver. If you really wanted the pharmacogenomic information, I think I'm not.
That'll be an interesting thing that comes up though, right? And I want to touch on too. We have Devin who's asking, without insurance, what would the cost be? And I know you mentioned that cash option of paying for it yourself, but I also know that there are programs offered, right? That could help with some people. So I was just at, Stanford is my hospital, and we're looking at running other specific tests that Medicare won't pay for, but I could join a program. And so can you talk about other ways if there is no insurance and you don't have that money to pay?
Great,
What are your options?
Great question. So I know Invitae has a patient assistance program. So for patients that have financial barriers to accessing the testing, our mission at Invitae is to make genetic testing accessible and affordable to everyone that will benefit from it. So we work very hard to remove any barriers. So if that is the barrier, we do have a patient assistance program. It's a pretty simple form to get all or a portion of the test cost waived. And that's for any of our tests, not just the pharmacogenomics.
Yeah. And I will put a link to that as well. And our last question here, and then if anyone has any questions or comments, please put them up here now. We're going to try and wrap it up so we don't keep Kristine all day long. But besides the SB 1191 that's happening, that's for California only.
Yeah.
So what are other initiatives that are being brought up? Where can we go with this? Because I know we've got a lot of patients on here who work with organizations who can really push forward things. So what can we do, or what's being done everywhere?
I am so glad you asked. I am actually on the steering committee for the FDA Collaborative Community for Pharmacogenomics, which is under the American Society of Pharmacovigilance umbrella. And we have been working with Swalwell and Emmer congressionally. They have introduced in February an act called the Right Drug, Right Dose, Right Now Act, Right Act for short. And this would help address a number of the barriers to widespread adoption of pharmacogenomics, including education funding for both patients and providers. A lot of the reason this isn't done is because both patients and providers don't know about it. Creating sustaining funding for CPIC, PharmGKB, other organizations that continue driving guidelines forward. It also says, hey, drug-gene interactions are just as important as drug-drug interactions. According to the FDA, let's update the EHR and pharmacy software systems to look at those too, make it easier. So it addresses a number of the barriers. And if you want to help push this forward, if you go to fourthcause.org, there is more information on how you can sign individual support, organizational support. If you have a patient story about pharmacogenomics, please share it. If you are willing to reach out to the representatives in your state, please let us know to say you want them to introduce the Senate companion or sign on the House side. It's really important legislation. The reason it's called fourth cause, by the way, is because adverse drug events are the fourth leading cause of death in this country.
Yeah. And what are the numbers on that? Isn't it globally one person every 60 seconds dies of drug interactions?
I don't know globally. I know in the United States, a patient dies every 2 minutes because of non-optimized medications. In 2016, the last time it was measured, we spent 528 billion on non-optimized medications, which is more than we spent on the drugs themselves or on any major chronic disease. So a lot of work to be done to help improve medication management.
And we've got a couple of questions, and I see that Whitney has joined us in the chat. And Whitney, would you mind sharing that link with Estella? I know that you have it, and I'm kind of trying to monitor all of these things at once. But if you have the link that people can go to, I would love for you to share that. But we do have a question from Emily. She says, is it like 23andMe where you where as you find new genes, you reach back out and update people who have taken your test, or do you have to retake a test?
It's a great question. So right now, Invitae has a robust 38 gene panel. It includes a lot of the high evidence genes, as well as a lot of developing evidence genes. So we feel like it's future proofed for a while. What we do provide information on over time is when new evidence comes out. Hey, we didn't know this before, but 2D6 also impacts this drug. That happens far more often, new drug gene associations. But it is possible you would have to retake the test in several years. But I think that.
And she's talking from the transplant. She was the transplant question too.
Yeah. I think it's possible. We're going to get to a point in my mind where everybody has a full sequence done. And that will provide a lot more robust information. But I would say this is pretty good information for quite some time. I was tested years ago and mine's still accurate. So.
And I think unless you get that liver exchanged, right, you really that wouldn't have to say anything. So I put the link up there that Whitney shared with us. And I wanted to say one thing too, is that you did mention that there are a lot of physicians who don't know about this yet.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important too, as a patient, to really, when you find new technologies, when you find new therapies, it's okay to come to your doctors and tell them that you heard about something, or send them a message saying that you've heard about this. And really, I think sharing that knowledge with them as well, that this is available, is extremely important, right? Because I know a lot of them focus on their jobs and they're not looking at what's out there, but to give them that knowledge, and for, even to bring them that kind of knowledge is highly and hugely important as you go through your own care. And so I think we have wrapped up our questions, and hopefully I got to everyone. And Carolina didn't join us. I know she was having an emergency, so I'm hoping she'll listen in on this, because I know this was a topic that she was really excited for as well. And I just want to thank you. And I want to thank you for really, I was never a student. I was kind of that sick kid who didn't really feel like anything was going to happen much. And really, having access to the pharmacogenomics and really seeing how science can change my life and change my care has been extremely important for just me as a person and me as an advocate. So I want to thank you for really coming out here, for talking to us, for telling other people, what's out there. And really, I'm hoping that people do discuss this with their doctors, and that they do go out there and talk to their legislators about the options. And Whitney has said it right here. If you want to see expanded access to PGX testing and the connection of that data to the EHR, or if you have a story yourself, if you've used or you've had a PGX test and it's changed your own care, please let us know as well, because we do need those stories to make sure that people understand how important this is for us. And Kristine, thank you again.
Well, thank you. I do want to say I've been at this over 20 years, and the thing that keeps me going is hearing stories like yours. So thank you.
Well, I think you are doing some amazing things, and you will help so many people down the line and save quite a few lives as well. So thank you. And thank you for everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next time. And I'm going to end this broadcast, and have a great day, everyone. And hold on. It's always ending these broadcasts. It's horrible. Okay. Goodbye, everyone.